Automate chess. The idea is quite simple. You draft an army and then a computer uses your army to clap the shit out of your opponent. I've yet to play any games myself, but I've watched a few of them. In most of those games, people generally go one of two routes. They either draft themselves a shitload of queens and rooks, or they draft themselves a shitload of bishops and knights. There also seems to be a prevailing sentiment that 2 queens is the most OP new meta, since every single person drafts 2 queens. However, unlike these nerds who draft a shitload of pieces, I've got a different strat. After being introduced to Automate by Eric Rosen's video, I came to the conclusion that a wall of pawns is the most overpowered and absolutely ludicrous bullshit you can draft in Automate. The reason for this lies in how drafting works. Each side is allotted 35 points to buy pieces with. Pawns are worth 1 point, bishops and knight are worth 3, rooks are worth 4, and queens are worth 7. The king is given to you for free at the end of drafting. So now that we know how drafting works, let's move on to why pawns are so damn broken. There was this minigame that I used to play in chess club. It's the 1 queen versus 8 pawns challenge. If the pawn player managed to promote, then it was their victory, and the queen player won if they took all of the pawns. With 1 queen and a row of pawns, the game is pretty simple. The single line of pawns struggle to defend themselves from the relentless assault of the queens and are quickly demolished. However, add a second queen and a second row of pawns and all of a sudden, shit starts going south real quick for the queen player. It becomes exponentially harder for the queen player to find hanging pawns to take, even with a second queen there to back her up. And it's not like you can use the second queen to trade, because any type of trade you take is always advantageous to the pawn player unless you have somehow managed to find 6 hanging pawns before trading. This problem only gets worse if we scale up to 3 queens and 21 pawns. The queen player's ability to play the game has fundamentally not changed. There really is not much difference in maneuverability or capturability between 3 queens and 1 queen. The difference between 1 row of pawns and 3 though is insane. With 1 row of pawns, it is nigh impossible to stop the queen from moving behind the pawn line. And once the queen gets behind the pawn line, it becomes virtually impossible to counter the queen's movements. She can threaten multiple hanging pawns at once and fork the pawn player so hard they just alt F4 on the spot. But the 3 row of pawns completely change the dynamic. Just look at this game. The queen now barely even get to play the game and is now more depressed than the Mordekaiser player seeing 5 QSSs on the enemy team. Anyways, let's get back to Automated. With 35 points of pawns, your board would look something like this monstrosity. Your opponent is definitely going to enjoy trying to grab hanging pawns against 4 rows of the little shitters. And not only is your opponent's life absolutely miserable because of how hard you outvalue them. Remember, they can never trade with you because each of their pieces is worth a whole squadron in your army. They're also faced by a second problem. The pawns take up a godforsaken amount of space, bro. There is so much shit on the board that if your opponent ever tries to develop their knight, you can just instantly goon them with 1 move. It's uncounterable, literally more unplayable than Mauser Ultimate. What does he do? Your little motherfuckers are like 4 moves away from promoting and he can't even develop. It's so fucking broken. What can he do? Oh, well shit.